Hello, I'm Ian Maddox. I'm the chair of the Happold Foundation. The foundation is a charity dedicated to supporting the application of engineering skills and experience to make a positive impact on people's lives. And ostensibly, the partners of Bura Happold give money to the foundation in order to fund other partner organizations in the work that we do. And we divide what we do into four areas: into human development, futures, the younger age group of students, education, secondary education, perhaps tertiary, and thinking. And the city conversations are part of our thinking piece that Andrew curates very skillfully for us. And so Lucy is somebody that we also support, and so I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what she says. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, so my name's Lucy. Just a quick introduction to myself before we start going through the different panelists and hearing what they've got to say. So I work in the built environment. I'm a structural engineer, and I've got several years experience working in sort of a variety of building projects. Throughout my career, I've taken real interest in the kind of development of engineers. So that's starting from work experience students all the way through to how experienced professionals have developed their working knowledge and understanding at later stages of their career. And to this extent, I'm currently studying for a master's at UCL in engineering education, which is supported by the Happold Foundation. And yeah, we've just sort of put this whole conversation together as industry and as academics aware that sort of things are changing in what people want out of a practicing engineer, and also out of what maybe a student might be wanting when they come at 18 or 16 or however old, and what they expect from an engineering program when they join it. So got a great panel lineup today. We're going to start with Ed McCann. So Ed is a senior director at Expedition Engineering, and in this role he has led the delivery of projects like the Infinity Bridge and also of the Olympic 2012 Velodrome. And he is also the immediate past president of the Institution of Civil Engineers. So Ed has been involved in the creation of engineering education programs for over 20 years. So he's created programs in creative design, and also he did co-found Constructionarium, which is something which I know loads of engineers have gone through whilst they're studying. So today Ed is going to be talking about kind of his perception and the perception of the industry about the state of where we are at the moment when it comes to skills and skill requirements, and why we need different skills and different kinds of engineers. So Ed, take it away. You've got 5 minutes. I'll stop you and getting close to the end.
Thank you, Lucy. Okay, so I'm going to kick us off with some reflections, observations and challenges, largely informed by that sort of increasingly long experience in education and skills, but also and particularly informed by a research project that I led a few years ago into professional skills needs for civil engineers in infrastructure. And if you like, that's the background to these position statements with a couple of examples. So first of all, I believe that we face new challenges which require us to use new techniques and tools in an ever and fast changing context. And a couple of examples there of things that are sort of emerging as critical for us are: how do we design for and manage carbon in the way that we do our work in the built environment? Which was not a thing that we had to worry about very much 30 years ago, and we do need to worry about it now, and it requires us to do things rather differently than we did, and we need new skills to do that. That would be a simple example. Coming down the road at us, we've got the same kind of challenges around biodiversity. How do we understand the impact of what we're doing on biodiversity, and how do we adapt what we do so we can achieve the outcomes we have? And other areas which I think are really pertinent today are designing for and with communities for societal outcomes rather than operating in splendid isolation of our end clients. These are increasingly challenges which require us to behave differently with different skills. We need, therefore, new and enhanced skills configured in different ways, so in different teams, to meet the challenges that we face. I believe that our existing structures and practices for professional learning are not consistently effective or efficient in delivering the skills outcome that society needs. We are massively over-focused on initial education, so we try and cram ever more and more stuff into undergraduate programs and moan on at universities that they're not producing some kind of eternally brilliant output that's fit for a 40-year working life, and that we need to think very differently about the way that we deal with emerging skills needs through whole life development and training. And I think that's a huge deficiency in our current system, is that we don't deal properly with through life training and development, and we need to do better. In the round, we need to improve. At the same time as these challenges and deficiencies are in front of us, we have, over the last few years, developed a lot of knowledge and understanding about how people learn. We've also developed a whole load of technology that supports learning, which I think gives us an opportunity to do much better, both in initial education and through life learning. And the sort of thing I'm talking about there is the understanding in pedagogical terms of how people learn, and the fact that people learn in different ways and at different times, in different contexts, but also the technology we can use to help them, whether that is gamification, whether that's scenario-based learning, immersive learning in 3D environments, and all the sort of digitally enabled things that we can do and we can deliver remotely or face-to-face and so on. So I think that at the same time as we have new challenges and we need to learn new skills, we've also got a whole load of new understanding, new technology, new technique that will help us do that if only we apply ourselves. And the net combination of those things, of course, is that we get what we need in terms of the outcomes for society, whether that's giving people an opportunity to work on things or providing them with the infrastructure and built environment that they need. I believe that we urgently need to take advantage of these improved opportunities in how we learn to deliver the societal impact that we so desperately need to provide. At which point, that's me for now.
Great, thank you very much, Ed. Yeah, so I guess you've caught this call to arms. We need new skills. We need new things. Things aren't quite up to scratch, which I think, yeah, it's a very important message and one that we'll be able to follow quite effectively with what's about to be said. I'm not sure if anyone's got any questions for now, so I think maybe that's quite a good primer for moving on to Julie, and then we'll come back and see what happens and how we engage through at the later stage.
Thank you
so
much.
Thank you. That's right. I'll give you a little introduction if you want as well. Yeah. So we've got Professor Julie Pegula-Woods here, and she is an expert in built environment safety and worked in the industry leading BRE's testing and certification arm internationally for a number of years. But since 2021, she has been a professor and a director at TEDI London. So that's the Engineering Design Institute London, which is a new engineering education provider in London. So Julie's going to be talking a little bit about the need for different engineering courses and what they're doing at TEDI as well. So thank you, Julie. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the Hubble Foundation really for hosting us today, which I think is a really important discussion. And maybe at a time where society's appreciation and recognition of the importance of engineering skills could not be more center stage, actually, looking back, I do think we really get that. And throughout my career, really, first as a researcher and then at BRE and now at TEDI London, I've worked really at the interface of those engineering and other disciplines throughout this time, really from multidisciplinary projects to peers from across the world across the world into supporting standardization. So they come from many disciplines, they come from various places. And so really, it's sort of, I've tried to sort of go back a little bit to my roots in civil engineering to sort of think a little bit about this challenge and whether it's new or not, but maybe sort of a short slide about TEDI London, just so that to give a little bit of background to TEDI. So a new higher education provider set up by, let me just try and share this to make sure I get you get to see this, just double check. So yes, really a new higher education provider founded by the University of New South Wales, the Arizona State University and King's College London, really settled in Canada Water. We'll talk a bit about that, but really where I wanted to get to in a minute is this. So I'll leave that on for just a little bit. Oh, does it say it's blocked? Yeah, so here we are. So I think preparing for today, I sort of wanted to think a bit about how pace and intensity of change is always and remains a constant really in engineering. And I think it's driven by ingenuity, but also enabled by the adaptability of engineers generally. And it's really around us. I mean, Teddy London is part of the Canada Water Redevelopment. We're based in Southwark, a part of the biggest regeneration project in a generation in London and also in Europe. But you know, it's sort of all around us. And this is really just to show you the latest iteration, actually, of where we are, just as an example, from the early days of Surrey Docks being the key port for processing whale carcasses for blubber and oil, to the Brunel's family's Thames Tunnel opening in 1843. To then the Bazalgette super sewer that sort of made its entry then, to us really seeing, hopefully, the Tideway Tunnel opening in 2024. So just that, I think, shows us a little bit that our time is also no exception there. So from big data to AI, climate emergence to robotics, you know, we're generating more data a day than since the dawn of civilization up to the year 2000. So these challenges and opportunities do not fit neatly in an established silo. And just as Brunel completed part of his training with a master clockmaker in France. So it seems only logical to me, really, that our way of building skills and teams and collaborations must adapt equally. And I think Ed sort of mentioned that already. But I think also so must our image as an industry, the impact that we can bring and do bring, the talent we encourage, and the consequences, as a consequence, the education that we provide. So 3 points for me, really, I think, for this discussion tonight that I wanted to bring. So I think it's a really different future for the professionals entering, and we need to evolve efficiently, encouraging and welcoming talent. And I have the privilege to meet some of those future engineers every day, actually, and they all are passionate about their contribution. And actually they appreciate not to be shoehorned into an out-of-date suitability assessment for this challenge that they're able to meet. So there's 1 point for me about, you know, what does this future talent that we need for our industry? They also know that the future is less secure, right? So they know that some of the roles that we see today will cease to exist before they retire. And to getting this diverse talent and allowing them to evolve together is efficient, but also vital to prepare them for the future and for the outcomes that they will need to generate. I'll just stop sharing my screen now so that we can all see each other a little bit better. My second point really was all about how do you shape those skills of tomorrow? And I want to make a bit of a statement as to how I think we do that. But I think really it's sort of by really embracing to drive outcomes and showcasing industry best practice and excellence from day one, actually. So to be fit for the future, I think future professionals have to be comfortable and practice to work across those disciplines. And leading projects as well as cutting edge research shows us these interfaces and requirements clearly now. And these are sure to increase, and we know that too. So embracing industry best practice, honed in delivery, and let education be that melting pot and exercise and build the skills required to thrive. And I think I want to end on one last point, and that's really a point about personal attributes like building resilience and building the ability to adapt. It's a rapid evolving world. I don't think that's new. You know, as I sort of said a little bit with some of those examples just in one area of London. But, you know, it's really built, you know, rigor is built in exchange, it's built in learning from failure, and it's built in successful collaboration. And so future looking and critical skills, I think, are built in as wide exchange and challenges as possible. And, you know, we shouldn't shield the future professionals by simplifying these outcomes, but making them embrace the real world complexity that builds this practice. And I think highlight and exercise the ability to adapt and surround them by guides on the sides rather than sages from stages. So that's
Great.
my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think, no questions in chat, but I think, Julie, would you be able to kind of just give a very brief overview as well, kind of build on that, just like specifically TEDI in itself and then the program you've designed there and why it is?
Yeah, so TEDI London was developed really by ASU, Sydney, University of New South Wales and Sydney and King's College, because they really realized that they weren't exiting enough engineers and not diverse enough engineers in their standard programs, and really wanted to invest into a startup higher education provider that could disrupt the standard way of getting people to embrace engineering and getting a more diverse set of students to think about engineering as a career, but then also lead with a different type of program that embraced real world challenges and project-based learning. So the point Ed made about more diverse challenges and more diverse ways of learning, different ways of learning, and bringing really this sort of concept into engineering education. I think what's also quite important is it sort of has removed some of those barriers. And I sort of said this a little bit about the shoehorning of a suitability assessment. So it's really trying to embrace talent from wherever it comes and wherever it is, and it tries to remove the barrier of a maths and physics education that has to be chosen by the age of 14 to be able to access engineering education in Britain at the moment. So really trying to bring the ingenuity and the design thinking and just the energy to embrace challenges and bring this talent to engineering, and bring it to engineering and being formed by the complexity of what engineering is about. So always teach engineering in context rather than just an isolated skill. So yeah, that's us. We've been going. We're into our second cohort and about to recruit our third cohort. So really, really new, supported by our founders, but really sandpitting and being on our own in delivering this really novel concept, which we're looking to sort of talk more about here, which is brilliant. Thank you for having us.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Julie. It's some interesting stuff. Hopefully you can build on a bit later. So our third panelist is Nick Ford. And Nick is a neurodivergent design engineer, and he runs a small disciplinary design consultancy, which is called Pipsqueak Developments. So in this consultancy, they are solving the unusual 3D problems that tend to push boundaries. And he actively recruits talented individuals who he sees that brains also work in a slightly different way. So Nick today is going to be talking about the importance of engaging with students from an even younger age than we might be hearing about the university students. So Nick, you've got 5 minutes as well.
Cool. I'll just share my screen. There we go. Right, so hi, I'm Nick Ford. So my company is Pipsqueak. We're design engineers, and we've been doing it 20 years. We're very fortunate. We get to solve unusual three-dimensional problems for people. Just advance that. We get to work on big things and silly things, and it creates a bizarre array of problems. And that means that we get to have to use unusual skills, unusual talents, unusual people, unusual subcontractors in unusual ways, which makes me very happy. But it also means that we get a chance to introduce young people to fantastic projects. We get a chance to light a fire. So, and this was a treat putting this together, because these are just a handful of the people that we've helped into careers in engineering in the last 20 years. And it makes my heart sing to look at all those young faces, and I can picture each and every one of them that we've given a leg up and infused and engaged and given them skills and knowledge and time just in a week with us to fire them up. And some of them have gone stratospheric. But we need to engage earlier than that, because by the time they've got to secondary school, we've lost half of them. We need to engage them much earlier than that. So our next generation of engineers starts in primary school. And it starts by us engaging with them, giving them role models so that they can be what they see. It means that we've got to take women and people of color and people of different gender into primary schools so that people can actually see these are what engineers look like, and not just engineers, right across the STEM environment. But we've also got to give them an opportunity to get messy and apply that knowledge. This is casting is engineering. It's also creative, it's also messy, it's also fun. But it's a chance to engage and create young minds that want to do it. There's no point creating fantastic T-level courses, university courses, if we don't have the young, enthusiastic people that want to do those courses, that need to have that in their lives. Sometimes we even go younger. We go right down, and to actually spend a little bit of time in class to say, I'm an engineer and I love it. These are some of the silly things that we do. Isn't that the kind of thing you'd love to do? We've got to inspire, and inspiration starts really young. If we're not doing it at primary, we're not doing it. We're not making those seeds. School doesn't work for everyone. It didn't work for me. I don't engage well with a written word. My ADHD wasn't diagnosed until very, very late. I learnt by seeing and doing. I was very fortunate that I had fabulous woodwork and metalwork teachers. These teachers no longer exist. So a lot of what I desperately want to see is this investment in, yes, engaging at primary level, but also making sure that the technical staff in secondary schools can carry on that spark, can actually fan those flames, and provide, especially for neurodivergent people, a chance to use their hands and have the conversations while their brains are using their hands to make the future generation of engineers, of technicians, of scientists. I'm engineer focused. So at Pipsqueak, we provide STEM role models. We support our local teachers. We are a tiny company. We're 3.5 people. But if we can make more than 30 young people, young engineers in 20 years, what can bigger companies do? I need everyone to step up. We deliver fun STEM lessons within our local, but we do it from our bottom line. We don't receive funding. And so we can all do more. Thinking differently is good for everyone. And if we do it together, we can make the next generation and the generation of that, of STEM professionals and specifically engineers. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. That was great. Yeah, it's kind of the importance of industry getting involved at that, you know, any age, or but have a big hand in it is super important. Yeah, totally agree. Yes, so no questions specifically for you, Nick, so save them for the discussion at the end. Well, thank you very much. So our fourth panelist is Professor Emanuela Tilley. So Emanuela is a professor of engineering education, and she's also the director of the Integrated Engineering Programme at University College London, so UCL. And so prior to joining UCL, Emanuela has worked as a professional project engineer on some large multidisciplinary projects. So she's going to be talking about the Integrated Engineering Programme at UCL and how they've adapted an existing large-scale course for this new kind of graduate, a new kind of engineer. So I've only got 5 minutes.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. So UCL Engineering is a rather large faculty, and we've been in existence for a very long time, and we have quite a lot of departments with different types of engineering disciplines. And traditionally, those disciplines have been completely siloed and autonomous. So some say UCL Engineering within UCL is like a small university within a large university. And so the Integrated Engineering Program came about in 2014, and it was off the base of some really good practice in the departments already, one of them being civil engineering, where Ed McCann was actually, and Chris Wise were both visiting professors at the time and making some really good progress there, as well as some significant changes structurally in civil engineering. And so across the faculty now in the undergraduate, there are some core elements that we put in, completely changed the way we teach so that we can address that skills gap that was actually, that story has been coming since about the late 2000s about that skills gap in engineering. And so we specifically built the program to target that. And one of the biggest things and the first things that we did was to break down those silos. So interdisciplinary studies and experiences were one of the first things we put in. And we've done a lot of educational research to understand that when students work across departments and disciplines and start to understand the roles that they play alongside each other, they're more open to the purpose or even understanding larger things like sustainability because of the complex systems thinking that they are introduced to from the first year. So we put in a lot of projects, so we call them challenges and scenarios, and our challenges, which happen in the first and second year, they are interdisciplinary, where we get students from different departments working together on a real project, or all of the departments. So in our second year, we have our students from across all of our 9 programs in the undergraduate to take on a topic under the sustainable SDGs, or the sustainable development goals. So those interdisciplinary studies just offer a very authentic experience for our students that perhaps develop those skills that we are all seeking. The other thing as well that I would say is that we now have minors. So our students used to come in with just the provision of chemical engineering or civil engineering, but now after their second year, they can personalize their degree so that the civil engineers can also do nanotechnology or programming, or they can take another language, they can do public policy, they can do further depths into environmental engineering. There are just so many things designed for society, and they do these alongside students, and these are interdisciplinary topics. And that often broadens the knowledge and that the students have, but also gives them more authentic opportunities to practice next to other types of engineers. And so one of the fundamental things that we've done, and this is where Teddy and Enmai, building new programs based on projects, where that's the curriculum. The curriculum no longer is core modules that are lecture and lab based, but bringing in that project-based learning, whether you call it challenge-based because it's aligned with an industrial or a community partner, or you call it scenario-based. And when we say scenarios, we make them 1-week intensives where they don't go to any other class. We've carved it out of their timetable, and they're like scrums, much like what happens in the workplace. You've got to develop something in a short amount of time, and you've got output. Those projects are different than the projects that we would have, let's say, term-wise. They have 10 weeks to do. So giving them that variety and constantly adding in those projects, different types of contexts, different types of assessments to say, this time, I want you to create a technical brief. That time, I want you to actually prototype it. This time, you have to experiment and do some testing and build the test yourself. Whatever it is, we are developing those skills, because in the first and second year, our students do 9 projects. That doesn't happen across the UK. In the UK, the model is they do a capstone project, whether they're in the 3rd year or a 4th year at an integrated master's. They do those large projects at the end, and that's not enough. But it's hard work to look at a program and poke holes into the core learning and actually put active learning in. So that's where our team-based projects come in, and the authenticity in the context. So things like, we can now embed EDI values because our students are working on teams, 9 teams in 2 years. And we talk about different types of elements when it comes to EDI. Like, for instance, They've done 4 team-based projects. How do you develop psychological safety as a means of getting the best out of your team? These are the sorts of things that we actually do teach and train them on so that they can do better in their collaboration skills and their team working skills. We can only do that because we put into the credits a designated thread of professional skills development. And that's not an add-on, it's not a portfolio. These are credits where when the students are working on teams, when they're working on projects, we teach them the skills they need to then exercise in their authentic learning practice. So much like what Ed mentioned, like analytical thinking, critical thinking, critique, criticism, questioning, these skills that are really about getting the best out of our opportunities and thinking at that level, talking about risk, even understanding things like leadership and collaboration. We do a whole lot on communication and technical communication, using data to deliver a message. We have to bring in some authentic learning, and we have to do this through some designated active learning. And then the last thing, just to say that mathematics have to be considered a tool to the engineering problem solving, not the other way around. So that when we teach mathematics, they know the context and application of the mathematics in the same way. And we've completely revolutionized the way we teach maths, because they don't learn the maths concepts until they learn an application. It's synonymous. Thanks.
Thank you. That was great. Cheers. Super. So yeah, I have some more comments at the end to hopefully touch on what you've been doing at UCL and just kind of the scope of changes that you've made and the impact that it's had on, I think, 10 years or so of students who've gone through that experience. So our final panelist is Professor Dave Allen. So he is the Professor of Engineering and he's Head of Programme Development at NMITE, which is the New Model Institute for Technology and Engineering, which is based in Hereford. So prior to this role, Dave has had extensive experience as a change agent and an industrial troubleshooter. So he's worked in a variety of sectors, making significant contributions to the effectivity of these places. So he's here with us today to talk about the programme at NMITE, and it's going to include their approach to the curriculum design and also how they've gone about designing their learning spaces. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting project and a really interesting university. So here we go, Dave, you got 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. So I'm going to show a couple of slides just to reinforce what I'm saying, and then I'll come back to those in a moment. So NMITE was set up in Hereford a couple of years ago. We had the awkward unpleasantness of the COVID to deal with, which gave us some delays in our project startup. We are very much a parallel with TEDI, who you've heard from already this afternoon. Very similar model, very similar purpose. The difference is that we are a solo startup. We haven't worked in conjunction with some established institutions. We've done it from scratch. Anybody wants to know the logic of that, we'll discuss that later. But it allows us to move away from any established conventions. We started with no policies, no procedures, no historical rules and regulations, and to give us an opportunity to look at what do we actually think we should be doing nowadays with the current understanding of education, the current understanding of societal needs, industrial needs, rather than just carrying on the same way because that's what our administrative processes require of us. So just to go through a couple of slides, one of our key principles was recognizing that we're looking at capability of our graduates, and that capability is valuable to employers and to themselves. And normally we tend to focus on the technical abstract learning, and those who are in academia will recognize Bloom's taxonomy. I use it as a general indication of the process that students will go through. And generically, that's what most courses focus on. What is it that they need to know by the end of it? And in case of engineering, that's knowing the engineering. But as we will be all aware, coming out of a university and knowing a lot about how engineering is done doesn't make you a good engineer. There's equally the being an engineer, which is often referred to as the soft skills, which is a name I loathe and detest, because it's actually a lot harder. And this is the part that differentiates people in regard to success. So we could call it professional practice. And again, this needs to be learned. This needs to have a journey. But there's another section to this. And just knowing what to do and knowing how to do it, if you're not motivated to do it and you don't have the self-belief to be able to do it, it's not going to happen. So we wanted to develop a program that would look at all aspects of this so that we could actually look at how we could develop the whole person in the subject of engineering. But that doesn't mean to say we'll always be limited to engineering. Our new model, as it were, is based upon this logic. And you can normally talk about, you have lots and lots of different subjects. And most curricular designs and most programs are based around that first highlighted section. Whereas actually that's the bit that differentiates those good graduate students. How do we get there? This is quite complicated, so I'll kind of simplify it if I may. But if a student progresses from the left to the right through level 4 to 7, most people would focus on the technical, the engineering core subject. What we want to focus on is how the individuals themselves learn. And they're all different. We know that they're all different. And if we recognize they're all different, trying to cram them through an identical process is not going to work. So we have to consider that factor. We also need to get them from a passive learning situation, which is the way the previous level of education is primarily delivered at the moment, and get them interdependent as quickly as possible. We've got to work on their motivation, helping them with their development, their professional knowledge, and their individual awareness, engagement, and social responsibility. If we can get these areas all working in parallel, then we've got a chance of helping somebody to have that lifelong learning thing that we all hope for. And it's getting that right balance. And it requires a number of different things. If we just focus on what is to be learned, you're missing out on how you're going to learn it, where you're going to learn it, and when you're going to learn it. And these have a significant influence on how that individual will learn. As we've talked about, Nick was talking about different students. We want to bring in a number of other people into engineering. We need to expand the recruitment into engineering. So we are looking to recruit artists and creatives, not just people who happen to be good at maths. So thank you for raising that final point, Emanuela. It's exactly the same way that we believe on the math side. Where you learn, the learning environment itself has a massive influence. The schedule and pattern of that learning, how it's concentrated. All of these things have a significant influence on that learning journey. The easiest way for those of you in the design field is to relate it to cognitive ergonomics. If you're designing a product, it is now normally expected that you would design something so that it is easy to be used. Remove unnecessary obstacles to learning or assessment, develop opportunities to enhance it. Active collaboration has to be fundamental to that. And down to the space design, just as the last picture, we don't have any lecture theatres, we don't have any classrooms, and we don't have any laboratories. That is a typical studio that our nominally 25 students per group would learn in. They learn one module for a month in that space, and we bring the learning to them. They don't have to walk around to campus to find it. I will take questions if we have any.
Thank you, Dave. That was great. No, yeah, I think probably best now. All the panelists sort of turn their cameras on and get ready to answer questions. I think we can probably start by, I just want to have an open question before we go to something a bit more sort of targeted. But would it be possible for the panelists to sort of comment on what they've heard and what they've got any thoughts on different people's presentations and what they've been saying? If anyone wants to start off the bat.
Can I just throw into listening to Emanuela's presentation? I find the idea of your project-based engagement really exciting, because it's. Do I think that it stands a much better chance of generating a graduate that I would want to employ? Absolutely. Yeah. So that was a breath of fresh air for me.
It is really hard for the students. So I remember, to set out this way of teaching, we kind of set out for them the way they're going to learn, because when they come to UCL, they think it's going to be lectures and labs. And when we say from the first day, you're going to meet some people and do some teams, they're like, I've had alumni say to me, I wanted to cry that lecture that you said I was going to be working on a sustainable energy project for the first 5 weeks of my class year, because I didn't think I could do it. So teaching first years, you know, in projects is different than the third and fourth years, but there's just so much to be gained about adding in active learning in the first 2 years, even if our students are a bit conservative.
Fabulous.
Yeah, I know Dave has put his hand up, but I would, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Dave.
Just following on from Emanuela, I mean, when we've written our program, and we're applying it across all of our programs, including the new BSc in Sustainable Built Environment starting in September, is that they are project-based as the default. We've got 28 modules. 20 of those are, in general terms, group-based activities with an external partner. So you don't just learn how to hate teamwork, which is the generic activity when you do 1 or 2 group activities in your degree. This is the norm. What the students, sometimes, and this is a very interesting dynamic, after the first 3 modules where it's group activities, they're kind of learning how to get fed up with each other. They haven't learned the strategies yet on how to manage it. So we then give them a module in which they're on their own. And it's very quick that within about a day and a half, they've formed into clusters, because they've developed, without realizing it, that collaborative working is so much better on so many levels. But you have to lock it into the program to drive that through, because it's too easy for us to drive non-collaborative programs because they're easier to deliver.
Great, thanks, Dave. Julie,
yeah, no, it's really interesting, and I think Emanuela made a comment on that, and so did Dave. I think all of the new programs actually would embrace the project, but also I think embraces, in our case, the collaboration with industry, and to tie yourself to a real outcome. And I think that's to sort of, you can isolate complexity by forging this, so the sage from the stage that knows what good looks like, and so therefore the student follows the path and tries to do the right things, or you embrace a real world outcome that takes teamwork to get to, including the people that are working with you that are ultimately more experienced and part of the faculty. So, this sort of collaborative approach also across the generations and across the various parts of the problem solving process, I think is a key issue here to sort of model as well.
There's a really lovely comment about interdisciplinary working in the chat. And one of the things that we found was that this doesn't happen very often in universities where, disciplines that are established. So we have to think about the existing programs that are already out there, the very traditional engineering programs that are already out there, and how we can bring in interdisciplinarity. And I think we really do have to start looking to industry, because I think you're doing it so much more than we are. So how it happens, how you work together, why you work together, is something that I would love to see more examples of in the workplace, so that we can bring in that authenticity in terms of how we organize the students, particularly, and the type of work that they do together would be really good.
Yeah, thank you. On that, I was kind of wondering how are you currently engaging with industry? How, I don't know, across all universities, how are you getting those feedback from people who've been who graduated and got jobs? Is there?
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
For me, it's twofold. I think it's yes, the ones that have gone and come back, you know, and UCL will be able to speak to that because they've been doing it for longer. But I think for us, it's really very much about bringing industry into the classroom and co-delivering, and really bringing the reality of this to the problem that is being solved there and then, with all of warts and everything else and the difficulties that come. Dave mentioned a few, and we get the same. You know, it's hard work. You know, and resilience is built by coping with what needs to be an end outcome that is not determined by one person that will know what good or not good looks like, but tying yourself to a real outcome.
Yeah, great. Maybe go to Ed from industry if he's got a point to make us that as well. He's got his hand up.
I was slightly going to change direction a little bit, but
that's fine. Go with it.
I mean, I was going to, it's interesting actually, I mean, the whole idea of project-based learning or problem-based learning is not new. I mean, people have been working with this for decades, and I think serious pedagogists understand the merits, and anybody who's been involved in it can see the quality of the learning experience, and you know, the ability of people to work in teams to understand problems, and just it's a superior method of teaching, and it's great to see that people on the panel are involved in that. But in a sense, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? Because the work that we did, so we surveyed, we did a research project into civil engineering skills back in 2018, and we surveyed and we got a very good response, over 2,000 respondents across the sector. Roughly half of companies reported significant difficulties recruiting in their skills needs, but none of them had problem recruiting graduates. The skills problem wasn't the graduate skills problem. The skills problem was later. The skills problem was that they were unable to get the sort of people they wanted with 10 years experience. There was no shortage of graduates. And so we're doing what we always do, is we're focusing on this moment when everyone gets together to learn how to be a professional in university or in further education. And we're not answering the broader question, which is, how do we service the skills needs of a sector that has all of these big challenges? So I've been arguing for years that actually the universities and further education institutions are missing a huge opportunity to engage with skills development through career. It's like you come in, you get your little squirt of education, then off you go. And so, and I think in part the answer to the question that you were recently on, that you were asking about how do we get industry involved in education, is you get involved in industry. And if it's really notable to me how separate in the UK professional practice is from the university environment. If you work in Southern Europe, consultant practices, contracting practices, they're in universities. You know, senior practitioners work in universities a day or two a week. Your top professionals are professors at universities, as well as running practices and doing that sort of stuff. So the connection between universities and practice and industry is much stronger, in my experience anyway, in other places. And somehow or other, if universities could be or educational institutions, I don't just want to focus on universities, could see themselves more as whole life partners with professional practice and the sector in addressing skills needs, then you would find that connection that would drag people back in and I think mutually reinforce.
Thank you. I think this leads quite nicely into one of the comments we've got in the chat. So that's from Celia. Would you like to unmute yourself and sort of address it to the panel directly, or I can read it out?
Yeah, sure. No, that's fine. Yeah, similar vein. I'm interested that a lot of the comments seem to be around. I'm just going to see if I can simultaneously put my video on so you can see my face. People at the front end of their careers, and obviously nowadays, I mean, especially for my generation, where we're still a few decades off retirement. but it's also been a few decades since we left school. The kind of career fluidity that there is now, people often have to, I'm on my 3rd career now, but I wonder if, I'd be interested to know thoughts on perhaps the untapped potential of lapsed engineers. I know several of my cohort who I graduated with became teachers, or, you know, just dropped out of the work life altogether when they had kids or whatever. It's kind of those people, is there scope for them to like retrain? Seems a bit strong, but, you know, refresher courses, or you know, what's the kind of upskilling later in life that doesn't just get branded as, I don't know, yeah, what does adult learning look like in this space when people have, you know, financial dependence and the rest of it?
Great, thanks, Celia. Dave, I know your hand's been up for a previous point. Do you have anything to say on this as well?
No, this was the point I was going to respond to, actually.
Oh,
yeah,
brilliant.
Totally agree with you. We've talked about this, shall we say, generic undergraduate model, but in our case, our delivery model is designed for CPD, retraining, reskilling, a number of other ways in which learning happens at different points in career. Even at our undergraduate level, our undergraduates range from 18 to 37 at the moment, and looking for career changes, mature students is a very specific target area of ours. If you talk about the built environment, our CAT centre that we've just built is specifically focusing on timber technology, and is running conversion courses for people who maybe have already got qualifications in civil engineering, but want to understand how they can add in the timber elements to that prior knowledge, so that they can become, develop a level of currency in their abilities. So agree with you totally. It's part of our mission.
Great, sounds good. And Julie, so I've got something to say.
Yeah, I think I wanted to come back to the point of, and I think it's a brilliant point you've made, Celia, and also Ed, because it's about really these models thrive on diversity, right? They thrive on bringing people together from different backgrounds, from different interests, from different stories up to this point, and actually it's a really intensive model. And so the model does rely really on this sort of diversity come through to develop some of these solutions. I think I would add that we know that the solutions that we develop become better because of it. And so I think where the challenge lies, in my view, and that's something we're sort of thinking about really carefully, is sort of what is the right model to facilitate this, right? You said it before, you say, it's true, isn't it? It's a different lifestyle. It has to happen in a different way. So we've been experimenting really with design sprints, with models by which you can partake in part of something that is sort of challenge-based, but brings in a really multifaceted set of experts, but also a challenge that you solve together. So I do think, that's really where we need a little bit of interaction, I think, to understand what is a model that can deliver for a more variety. And I mean, this is not just, older or younger, it's also about economical background. It's about, how much time do you have to study versus how much time you have to earn money to be able to sustain your studying. So it comes, in various, if we want to encourage diversity of people to come, we need to really think about how we do this sort of learning in a way that is embracing of everybody's requirements.
Great, thank you. Emanuela, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, just a small point. I mean, and there's a comment about the difference to changing program at a large, traditional institution versus having a blank slate at Teddy or Enmine. But it is really difficult at UCL to offer anything that sets outside of the 3 or 4 year program we have in the undergraduate here, right? We have master's programs that also have a tight timeline. We don't, institutionally, it's really difficult to move outside that model. We don't even have part-time engineering courses because we just don't have the infrastructure to be able to establish that type of learning. And this is to address those, those that are in their career already that want to be educated again or, upskill. Now, one of the things that's a continuous dialogue that's happening is the micro courses, or the micro badges, or the small short courses that you can actually get credit at the institution, and anyone external of the institution could literally build a degree program by taking all these micro courses. And it's exactly for an external audience, and it's taking the work that we have in our undergraduate, our master's program, and giving it essentially to the external audience, and for them to educate themselves in that way. And once they complete it, they would get some recognition. Now, we're struggling in engineering to see how we could actually frame it in that way, because there's so many prerequisites and all of these things. So how could someone actually take a course without having any prior knowledge, right? So how could you actually, have someone build their own courses? But we could certainly do something with regards to professional skills and the skills gap that's happening in careers. And I think this is where industry would come to us. I'm now the director at the Center for Engineering Education, and that's something that we want to look into. But unless we have an audience that says this is really needed, we're not exactly sure how to pitch it or what to include. So I think that could be a partnership would be really, really useful to actually now say, if we made micro courses, how could we tailor to what your needs are? And we could probably do this for different sectors, or even small to medium-sized companies versus the corporates. But that's just something to think of, because there are now mechanisms that most large universities in the UK are thinking about.
Thank you, Ed. Could you? I know you've got a hand up from a previous point as well, but could you also look to address how, whether it's the organizations themselves, or whether it's the role of the institutions, the engineering institutions, to be collating the needs and presenting that to universities, or how that relationship might be developed in the future? You need to unmute first.
Always a good idea. Yeah, I think actually the way that Emanuela and others were developing that theme, I think gets to the crux of the problem, which is the accessibility of the educational or training offer in mid-career. We know that people can't just give up life and go and do a year-long master's in the mid-career. It's just impractical for normal people with normal commitments. And so we need to rethink the way we serve up education. And as Emanuela said, there are some issues with project-based learning and integrated learning. It makes it more difficult to do it than some of the other ways. I'll just leave you a little observation. I had the good fortune last year to go down to the Royal Engineers Training College last year, where they had developed, if you're in the army, it turns out to be quite important to get trained quickly, because you end up getting dead if you don't get trained quickly. So they've got quite good at it, and they train welders, so they'll get you to the highest grade of welding on average in 230 days. It normally takes 4 times that amount when you go through a standard FE program. And the way they do it is they basically feed people through, and you move from one zone to another when you're ready to. You're not put into sequential semester-based learning with gaps and all the rest of it. And if you already know how to do something, you can get through an entire module in a day. So that, whereas what we do with formal education is we force everyone, regardless of their condition, typically through these extended programs. And so there's a lot that can be done once you start thinking about it, to actually accelerate programs of learning and focus on it. So I think great that Emanuela says that universities are thinking about that. Keep thinking about it, because it's not fixed yet. It needs to be affordable and accessible to everybody, otherwise it won't bloody work. But answering more directly your point, Lucy, I think there's a really important role for, and I do think professional institutions have a role to play here, to collate skills needs on behalf of industry and act as a bridge into universities. The industry is too fragmented for an individual institution to turn out to make an investment in a new program development against, oh, well, I spoke to somebody at this, that, or the other company and they seem quite interested in it. We need a more evidence-based and consolidated sort of set of skills needs. And I can see, I saw in the chat there that Robin is asking about some of these new challenges around climate, biodiversity, and so on. Well, these are areas where there are manifestly new needs, because people just didn't learn about this when they were at college. So everybody is on the back foot. So it's not a bad place to start to look at some of those areas. But in answer to your question, Lucy, I think that there is a role for professional institutions, an important role for professional institutions to fulfill, I think, in bringing together and validating skills needs such that the educational professionals can get their teeth into something substantial. And I like to think and hope that we'll get better at doing that in the coming months and years.
Great, thank you. Nick?
Yeah, I'm building on what Ed was saying, return to Emanuela's point of the fragmented courses. I think one of the things that excites me about that is the potential to remove educational access requirements in terms of A-levels. I think that we need to get to a point where the cost of accessing a module is modest. And that actually that somebody, so that it being module based, that an educational institution can also take more of a risk on someone, because I think that there's a lot of talent out there that that didn't achieve A-levels. There's a lot of talent that like Ed was saying, going through the Army's welding course. Well, the reason that works is because it's highly interactive. It's very practically based, but also it rewards people engaging physically. And so I think that having modules that allow people that have different access requirements, and some of those may be differential educational access requirements as well as the financial access requirements, has got to be a good thing.
Thanks, Nick. So I think we have maybe a question from one of the comments. So we've had a couple of sort of different questions about this, but I don't know if John, you'd like to unmute and ask your question more directly to the panel?
Yeah.
Or I
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I've been working in various elements of curriculum development and curriculum transformation at a program level and a faculty level, and also across the university for probably a decade or more. We made a lot of progress, but we always hit a lot of obstacles to do with culture, to do with institutional systems. And I was wondering how the experience of Emanuela at UCL, trying to turn a juggernaut round at a big university that's not too dissimilar to ours, compared to the blank sheet of paper that Julie had at Teddy and that Nick has had at NMIT. I think it's, oh, sorry, Dave has at NMIT. It seems a great advantage if you have a blank sheet of paper where you don't have to change a culture, fight with systems, and so on. So lessons learned, Emanuela, from your experience, and how do we get a blank sheet of paper experience in an established university?
Thanks, John. I don't know if best to start with, I think NMIT. Dave, if you've got any thoughts?
There is an advantage working with an administrative structure, is that you know what to do. If you don't have that, you have the difficulty is that you've got to decide what you're going to do. If you don't want to be constrained by a culture, you've got to come up with a new culture and decide what that culture is. And then you've got to get everybody to agree what that culture is, and then work towards delivering that culture when it's not written down anywhere, so therefore nobody has to follow it. So as with any startup, and more so in this kind of case, is having a clear vision and having a group of people who are able to work in that kind of creative environment, at the same time as, even though you have no constraints, you do still have the constraints of the Office for Students, the QAA, and all their friends. So it's it's a very untidy and difficult situation. So it's not for the faint-hearted. But as with most things, if you don't try, you're not going to achieve anything. And you know, it just takes that effort. I've been in a Manuelis situation. I've spent 9.5 years fighting an entrenched system, and that's why I came here, because it was a refreshing opportunity. I might need to go back somewhere else for a rest, but somebody else, what's your take on this?
I'd like to come in, if I may, Lucy, just quickly, because I wanted to just really echo that. It's really hard to do something different as well, and it's really hard to do it in a framework that is sort of set, though. So it's not a it's quite an established framework that you get assessed against. So whilst the innovation is out there, it is also having to show that it's as good as, if not better, than what is already delivering education right now. So yeah, just really echoing Dave's point, but it's not as much of a blank sheet maybe in sort of delivering it. I think it takes a lot of creativity as well to sort of show that the outcomes match and better.
Nice. So does anyone have any advice for how, if you were running a existing program, sort of lessons learned, or how to kind of go about making these meaningful changes on these kind of large courses?
Yeah, so if I just talk about the experience with UCL, so nothing came without pre-existing, even if it was small scale. So like I said, I think it's really important to say that there were models in UCL where our academics could see things working. So civil engineering put in the scenarios where there is 2 projects every 10 weeks. And it was working, and they carved it out of that curriculum, and we just opened it up to everyone else. Now, all the other departments had never done that type of active learning before, so we were training on the go, but we had precedents there. And there were other things like electrical engineering was doing a lot of skills-based learning, and so they designated time to, you know, teaching the design process, and so did civil engineering, but the design processes are very different in those 2 cases. And they taught professional skills through recognizing for electrical engineers that the design process is the way in which they're going to exercise their professionalism, right? So we looked at that and said, well, we can do this for all of the departments. So I think it's really important to take what you already have and make that work. I think it's then also important to engage what's already existing. So if it's not happening at your institution, it's probably happening at somewhere else. I mean, and then breaking down barriers, a lot of it is, you know, kind of hand-holding in the first case. There were a lot of regulations that said we couldn't do some of the things that we wanted to. And there were a lot of academics that had never had any experiences in teaching the way we were asking them to teach. They were very uncomfortable with it. And so we just had to build that community. There was a senior leadership decision and a fire that was set by our dean to say that this was going to happen, and then he let those people in the, you know, at the grassroots, the ones that really wanted to change education, he really gave them a platform to be able to do it. And so then we managed our expectations, those that didn't want to engage and those that did. We brought heads of education for all the departments to come together, and they sit at the faculty level and make the decisions about the type of teaching we want to happen across the faculty. And then we adapt. So the IEP, we have those fundamentals, but I am literally guiding like a slew of boats, if you like. Like, it's just the IEP in every department looks and feels differently. And they do that because it adapts to the type of curriculum and the type of knowledge that they have, and as well as their academics, staff-student ratios. But the benefit of being at the faculty level, I said in the chat too, is that there are some departments that have more ability or more capability and availability for teaching. So the smaller departments help the larger departments and that sort of thing. So I think looking at the program level, looking at faculty level to bring together and try to break down those barriers and really establish systems so that we go forward and not backwards is basically my job. That we're always moving forward and we're breaking down the UCL systems that used to put everything in a box. So yeah, I don't think it's any harder than the blank sheet of paper. I just think there are different ways of dealing with it. But the spark is there, the ideas are there. We just need to find ways of making it happen. But I think building a community and a vision is very, very important either way.
Great, thank you. That's sage advice. And Dave, have you got something to say on this as well?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I absolutely agree with everything Emmanuel has said. The two difficulties I do see very often is who is going to make that change or make those improvements or moves into a different direction. In most administrative systems, in most universities, there is no actual reward for doing that. And most people, they only really have the opportunity to make minor changes within a module in which they have a level of responsibility. There's very, very few people who can make program level changes, and certainly very few who can make departmental level changes. And even those who can make the program level changes, they don't have the influence within the modules. As I'm the head of program development, I'm also the program lead, I'm also the founding faculty professor of engineering education. That gives me a unique position, for right or wrong, to actually influence what is done and how it is done. And in most cases, I'm more of the gatekeeper of the philosophy, so that when people do come up with great ideas, they support or accelerate the vision rather than reverse back into an established practice. And it's finding people really who can think at a program level and consider how to innovate it across the study process is the difficulty, because it's not encouraged, it's not supported, and it's very rarely administrated. But I don't think there's a single thing that we do that isn't being done by somebody else. Everything we're doing, and in many cases, we've nicked from other people. We went and had a look, decided what we thought was a good idea, what's best practice, brought it in. Sometimes we may be doing it twice, 3, 4 times as much as they were doing it. It's the combination of it and the other things that we've added in. And an example where other institutions will have great difficulties is things like the estates planning and the facilities. I designed the learning spaces, I chose the chairs, I picked the carpet. I produced the shopping list of 247,000 items. That's a level of scope and influence that the majority of people will never ever have, and I'll never get it again. But our learning spaces have a greater effect on the learning development than the content of the curriculum. And if you can't influence your estates department, you're not going to make that kind of change. And that's where you get the difficulties. Sorry, I've gone on a bit. I do tend to.
No, very interesting. Thank you. Ed, yeah, do you have something to say on this? Your hand up.
So I was just going to add to the challenge, really, in the sense that in my observation, since I was first involved in sort of university teaching, whether it's 24 years ago or something, is money, actually, and an observation that how deeply commercial, nobody's talked about money yet, but universities in the UK are deeply, deeply commercial places. And the financial business model of any new program is critical. And if you don't have the number of students, you won't have a course. And if you can't justify your existence in pure financial terms, the program will be stopped. And so as other commentators focused on educational outcomes have not mentioned it, I've chosen to mention it and say that actually it's a critical consideration when you're developing and designing programs, is who's going to come here and are there going to be enough of them so that the university can make some money out of this? Because if they can't, it's not going to happen.
And if I add to that, can I just add?
Yeah,
this
of course.
is how it affects education, is that at UCL, our main income stream in many ways is the students, right? The students that come in and pay tuition. Now we know our international students pay way more than our home students. So that balance that we often don't have a decision, the institution says, take on more international students. That changes what happens in the classroom. So our strategy of bringing in PBL and getting these students to integrate amongst themselves, there are, in some cases, more international students than there are national students. And so we have to capitalize on that and recognize that we are now educating global engineers, right? Like you can use that as a barrier, or you can use that to say, actually recognizing that this world is global and we now have to recognize, and that's how our education is changing. So, you know, that, yeah, money has a lot of things, and not just at new programs, but even at established programs. And we do have to adapt our programs because of it.
Great, thank you. So we're sort of getting about 10 minutes left, so I think it's probably time to start thinking about closing comments. And I don't know if anyone's had any new ideas since, but all the conversations has been great. So I don't know if anyone's best. Emmanuel, you're just
Can I start? I've got two things that I really want to say.
Of course you can. Of course you can.
So, well, firstly, when we instilled the IUP, we dropped the requirement for physics and maths. So civil engineering is personally the one department that no longer require maths or physics at A level. And we've completely changed the way we teach mathematics, that actually the mixed ability class that is in both the civil engineering class, as well as we now have an engineering and architectural design program that is in the Bartlett, the architectural student, that is combination with civil engineering. Those students don't have the A-level maths either, and they are doing just as well as those students that have further maths that come from the mechanical and the electrical engineering students, because we teach maths from the center. So I think breaking down that barrier and sending that message that it is possible is something that we have to do. And, you know, we are very, very eager to send out that message that we have to teach maths in a different way, and it has to be more integrated into the program. But that has to be a message in order to diversify who we bring in, because it's totally possible to drop those requirements. The second is, one of the things we want to get into, and I think social responsibility and sustainability are going to be big things. And I know civil engineering are really driving that, particularly when it comes to the new accreditation and the moves that they've made to really kind of pinpoint what that means in civil engineering for, you know, AHEP 4. One of the things that we really want to kind of bring forward is this idea of responsible innovation. And that brings together the idea that skills matter, but also values matter, that responsibility that the engineer has when it comes to innovation, the elements of that learning consider things like anticipatory thinking, that I think is going to be also a new skill that requires critique, critical thinking, and reflection. To be able to think ahead of the consequences of your design, both positive and negative, is something that I think our students have to do better, and they can do that as part of the design process because that's their natural mechanism. I think the other thing too, if we look at Industry 5.0, you know, if we look at Industry 3.0 and 4.0 and now 5.0, I tell my students when we teach sustainability that they're going to go on and all of their solutions are going to be basically mitigation for the industrial revolution that has happened because of the way in which engineering has come to the fore. If we look at 4.0, it's all about digitization in many ways. 5.0 is about bringing people back into our decision-making, our work, and our education. And I think those are probably the three things that I wanted to say at the end of this, that I think is the future of our education.
Yeah, that was really good. Thank you, Emanuela. Nick, would you like to follow with your closing thoughts and what you've learned?
I just close that out in a slightly different way of saying that we also need to engage with failure management, and it's something that in industry we have to learn from our mistakes quickly, effectively, and in a way that isn't damaging. And so I would be very interested to hear some of the institutions on engaging with failure management and failure training.
Great, that was cool. Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting area to do there. I guess kind of closing comments from Dave. You're unmuted, so if you've got any.
Just to pick up on that last point. Yes, yeah. We are producing we've got a model. We're rolling it out for undergraduate, postgraduate, career changing, as a number of us have changed. This is my third career. I'm trying to decide what I'm going to do next, which will be interesting. Although I'm studying welding at night school at the moment, which is very, very bad. And it's coming up with that sort of environment where it's safe to learn, easier to learn. We don't make the learning difficult just to show how clever we are. We make it so we can maximize that learning gain. But also, as Nick has said, having it as a fail-safe environment. They've got to learn how to fail. They've got to learn how to get it wrong and how to cope with it and deal with it. And so that they can recognize that one of the fundamental roles of an engineer is to work out what's wrong with their proposal before the customer finds out. Because if they don't learn how to fess up to it, own up to it, put their hand up to it with pride to show how they've worked out what they've done wrong, then they're dangerous and I wouldn't let them out. So it's all part of that culture of getting them to think more broadly and effectively and collaboratively and just try and fix the world that the rest of us have made a mess of.
Great, thanks, Dave. Julie, have you got a kind of a closing remark as well on what you've been speaking about?
Yeah, I mean, at Teddy London, we call it the portfolio, not just the portfolio. I think you should keep both. It's an absolute crucial thing. And I know we're really aligning with initiatives of the IC and the iStruct about really learning from failure, reporting, and a culture of sharing. And I think that's sort of maybe my point as well. I think I don't come from higher education, I come from industry, and I think higher education speaks to higher education a lot. And I really want to think really, and also from Celia's comments and Ed's comments before, this is something we have to shape together across the various parts of what makes up this industry and makes the change. And I think that takes everybody to muck in, contribute, come in, give their time, and shape this together. And I think we've created a few places, of which Teddy London is one, that I think where this can happen because the door is open for it and it's encouraged. So it's really about collaborative changing this path forward.
Great, thank you, Julie. Yeah, and yeah, I guess Ed, you started. Can you finish us off as well with a couple of closing comments and thoughts? Great.
Okay, well, look, I think what we've seen and heard discussed there is some fantastic examples of cutting edge pedagogies applied to engineering education, particularly at the undergraduate level. And I think anybody who looks at any of that sort of stuff welcomes it. I think it's useful to understand the challenges of getting current educational sort of provision transformed into this. And again, there's lots of learning around the room on that, which others I hope could get something from. I think we didn't talk much about Nick's point about the sort of pipeline generation and the youngsters coming into this, and I think there's a real job of work to be done there. It's a rather difficult area, but it's as critical as Nick said it was, and so I think it does require attention. But I would end slightly where I started, really, which is what's the point of all of this is to make sure that society has the infrastructure, the built environment that it needs to survive and thrive. And into that, we need engineers and built environment people, professionals, trades, whatever it is, who know what they're doing and can create what we need without completely screwing the planet up. And that's what we're aiming for. And that, if you work from there back into, well, what are the skills? What are the attitudes? What are the collaborative behaviors we need? And then from there into how do we provide that through our educational institutions, working in partnership with our practice in commercial practice and public sector work, then you'll be doing something useful. So lots to be done would be my last line.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and definitely being in industry as well, you can see that, yeah, there's the conversations, especially the ones we're having today, but we can kind of keep them going, and the kind of both sides need to be engaging and doing their bit for that as well. But I think I just want to say thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. It's so exciting hearing about the different programs that are happening, and from when if those of us who were studying engineering sort of 10 or 20 or more years ago, how things have changed. It's quite exciting, and working with graduates today, yeah, there's something different, I think, about what we're seeing, and it's interesting to see how the skills gap will continue to be addressed in a positive way in the future. think that's probably last thing from me. Thank you very much. Yeah, keep it going, and yeah, it's super. So I don't know if Andrew, you've got anything to say at the end to sort of finalise the.
I think both Ian and I, on behalf of the Happold Foundation and everyone in the audience, would really like to thank you, Lucy, for
excellent.